There comes a point in life when people start pulling away, not because they're bitter, not because they're lonely, but because they've finally seen the truth. They've spent decades giving, accommodating, and maintaining relationships that were never truly balanced. And one day, something shifts. They stop explaining themselves. They stop justifying their presence in places that drain them. They start choosing peace over obligations, solitude over forced connection. The world looks at them and assumes they're isolating themselves, that something must be wrong. But in reality, they haven't lost their way. They've finally found it. Let's address a truth that often gets buried beneath the noise of everyday life. By the time a person reaches 60, they've walked through decades of experiences, seen countless faces, and navigated countless relationships. And yet, more often than not, they begin to step back, to retreat from the very people who used to fill their lives. Society brushes it off as old age, as isolation or decline. But the real reason? It's shocking in its simplicity, and it's profound in its implications. People over 60 don't avoid others because they've lost the ability to connect. No, they avoid others because they've gained the ability to see clearly. Think about it. When you're young, you're pulled in every direction. Expectations are heaped on you from every angle. Family, friends, society at large, you're told to make friends, build connections, say yes to invitations, and keep showing up no matter how you feel. You're told that being busy means being successful and that the size of your social circle reflects your worth. So, you give your time and energy to anyone and everyone who asks for it. You tolerate behaviors that drain you, words that cut you, and relationships that take more than they ever give. But when you've lived long enough, when you've seen the cycles play out over and over again, you start to question all of it. You start to see how much of your life was spent trying to meet expectations that were never yours to begin with. And you begin to understand the cost of allowing people into your space who don't honor your boundaries or your energy. By 60, you've likely had your fair share of betrayals. You've been let down by people you trusted, hurt by people you loved, and used by people you wanted to help. You've seen friends drift away when life got hard and experienced the pain of realizing that some connections were never as genuine as they seemed. These experiences are not failures. They're lessons. They teach you to value yourself, to recognize your worth, and to stop giving pieces of yourself to those who can't or won't appreciate them. This is why people over 60 begin to avoid others. It's not about bitterness, and it's not about shutting down. It's about finally understanding what true peace feels like and realizing how rare it is. It's about protecting that peace fiercely and unapologetically. Imagine spending decades in a noisy room where everyone is talking at once. For years you try to listen, to engage, to make sense of the chaos. But one day you realize you don't have to stay in that room. You can step outside into the quiet and breathe. That's what it feels like to embrace solitude after 60. But here's the part that should wake you up. You don't have to wait until you're 60 to learn this lesson. You don't have to wait until you've spent years in draining relationships or environments to realize that not everyone deserves access to you. Take a moment right now to reflect on your life. Think about the people you interact with regularly. Are they lifting you up or pulling you down? Are they respecting your boundaries or crossing them? Are they adding to your life or simply taking from you? The truth is, many of us are so conditioned to tolerate toxic behaviors that we don't even recognize them anymore. We make excuses for the friend who always criticizes us, the family member who constantly takes advantage of us, or the colleague who drains our energy. We tell ourselves that it's normal, that it's just the way things are, but deep down, we know better. People over 60 have the clarity to see through these illusions. They've lived long enough to recognize that life is too short to spend on relationships that don't nurture their soul. They understand that walking away from toxic people isn't selfish, it's necessary. And yet society often judges them for it. They're labeled as grumpy, antisocial, or set in their ways. But the truth is, they're simply choosing themselves. They're choosing authenticity over appearances, depth over superficiality, and peace over chaos. They're choosing to spend their time with the few people who truly matter, rather than trying to please the many who don't. This is a powerful reminder for all of us. You don't have to wait until you're older to protect your energy and prioritize your peace. You can start right now. You can begin to say no to what doesn't serve you and yes to what does. You can choose to walk away from relationships that hurt you and invest in the ones that heal you. You can decide today to honor yourself by being intentional about who you allow into your life. It won't be easy. The world will try to convince you that you're wrong, that you're being difficult, that you should just go along with what everyone else is doing. But remember this, the greatest breakthroughs come when you stop living for others and start living for yourself. The wisdom of those over 60 is a gift to us all. It shows us that there's a different way to live, a way that prioritizes inner peace and self-respect over external validation. It reminds us that life is precious and that our energy is sacred. So, if you're feeling overwhelmed by the noise of the world, take a step back. If you're surrounded by people who drain you, give yourself permission to create space. If you're holding on to relationships out of guilt or obligation, let's address something most people never stop to think about. As people reach their 60s, something shifts. You see it all the time. Older individuals withdrawing, keeping to themselves, becoming more selective about who they allow into their space. Society labels it as loneliness, bitterness, or simply the effects of aging. But the truth is far more powerful, far more revealing, and far more shocking. They are not isolating because they've lost the ability to connect. They are stepping back because they've gained the ability to see clearly. When you're young, the world tells you to be social, to say yes, to build relationships, to surround yourself with people at all times. You're conditioned to believe that your worth is measured by how many friends you have, how often you're invited out, how well you fit into the social game. You spend years, decades even, saying yes to every request, every gathering, every obligation, stretching yourself thin in an effort to be liked, to be accepted, to belong. You tolerate toxic people, draining conversations, and one-sided relationships because that's what you've been programmed to do. But something happens when you've lived long enough, when you've experienced enough. You begin to recognize the patterns, the cycles, the illusions. You look back at your life and realize how much of your time was spent on things that didn't truly matter, on people who didn't truly care, on conversations that were empty, on obligations that stole your peace rather than nurtured your soul. And at some point you make a decision, not out of bitterness, not out of resentment, but out of wisdom. You decide that your energy, your time, and your presence are too valuable to waste on anything or anyone that does not bring you true peace. By the time you reach 60, you've seen enough to understand the cost of allowing the wrong people into your life. You've been lied to, you've been manipulated, you've been used, you've given kindness to people who took advantage of it. You've supported people who never once showed up for you, and through it all, you've learned one of the most important lessons of all. Not everyone deserves to know your thoughts, your struggles, your victories, your heart. Some people are only in your life to drain you, to take from you, to use you as a convenience. And the sooner you recognize that, the freer you become. This is why people over 60 avoid others. It's not about disconnection, it's about discernment. It's about realizing that true peace is rare and that most people don't even know how to exist in genuine, meaningful relationships. It's about stepping away from the noise, the chaos, the expectations that never served you in the first place. It's about finally understanding that solitude is not loneliness, it's clarity. When you're younger, you are taught to fear being alone. You are taught that solitude is something to be avoided, something to be ashamed of. But with time, with wisdom, with experience, you begin to see the truth. Being alone does not mean being lonely. In fact, some of the loneliest people in the world are those who are constantly surrounded by others, constantly seeking validation, constantly filling their lives with shallow interactions just to avoid facing themselves. But those who have reached a place of true awareness understand that solitude is where real growth happens. Solitude is where you meet yourself, where you reconnect with your true essence, where you find the kind of peace that no external relationship can ever provide. This shift isn't about rejecting people altogether. It's about becoming deeply selective. It's about choosing quality over quantity. It's about only allowing those who genuinely respect and uplift you into your space. It's about understanding that it's better to have one or two meaningful connections than 100 surface-level acquaintances. It's about protecting your energy, your time, your soul from anything that disrupts your inner peace. And here's where the real power lies. This wisdom isn't reserved for those over 60. You don't have to wait decades to wake up. You don't have to spend years in toxic cycles before you finally give yourself permission to walk away. You can choose right now to stop giving your time to people who don't appreciate it. You can choose right now to stop entertaining relationships that drain you. You can choose right now to prioritize your peace, your happiness, your well-being. Ask yourself, who in your life truly values you? Who reciprocates the energy you give? Who respects your boundaries, your time, your essence? And who only comes around when they need something? Who drains you? Who leaves you feeling empty? Who takes more than they ever give? The moment you answer these questions honestly is the moment you take your power back. The moment you stop making excuses for people who show you time and time again that they don't truly care is the moment you free yourself. Because the truth is, the people who truly value you will never make you question it. The right people will never require you to sacrifice your peace just to keep them in your life. So when you see someone over 60 choosing solitude, walking away from unnecessary drama, being selective about who they engage with, understand that they have reached a level of clarity that many never attain. They have learned that real happiness does not come from being surrounded by people. It comes from being in alignment with yourself. It comes from being free of the burdens of false connections. It comes from living authentically, unapologetically, without the weight of societal expectations dictating how you should live your life. This is not isolation. This is liberation. This is the power of wisdom, the power of experience, the power of truly knowing yourself. And the sooner you embrace this truth, the sooner you will find real peace. The sooner you stop seeking validation from the outside world and start honoring your own intuition, the sooner you will step into the life you were always meant to live. The world will try to convince you that being alone is a problem, that choosing yourself is selfish, that prioritizing your well-being means you are pushing others away. But understand this, true connection, true love, true friendship will never require you to sacrifice yourself. The people who belong in your life will align with your energy, will respect your boundaries, will celebrate your growth, and anyone who does not will simply fade away. So, take a lesson from those who have lived long enough to see through the illusions. Protect your peace, be selective with your energy, and never be afraid to walk alone if it means walking in truth, because in the end, the people who truly matter, the people who are meant to be in your life, will always meet you where you are. And that, my friend, is the greatest freedom of all. Let's talk about something that most people never stop to think about. As people cross the threshold of 60, something shifts. They begin to withdraw, to become more selective about who they engage with, to pull back from the very people they once surrounded themselves with. And what does society do? It labels them as lonely, as bitter, as reclusive. It assumes they've lost their way, that they are somehow missing out on life. But the truth is far more profound, far more powerful. They are not stepping back because they have lost something. They are stepping back because they have gained something. Clarity, awareness, freedom. For decades, they played the game. They showed up, they engaged, they gave their time and energy freely. They put effort into relationships that weren't always reciprocated. They invested in people who only saw them as convenient. They endured conversations that drained them, commitments that suffocated them, and expectations that were never truly theirs to begin with. But something happens when you have lived long enough, when you have experienced enough, when you have seen the patterns of life repeat themselves over and over again. You wake up, you realize how much of your energy was wasted on things that never really mattered, on people who never really cared, and in that moment of realization, you make a decision, not out of anger, not out of resentment, but out of wisdom. You decide that your time is precious, that your peace is priceless, that you will no longer give pieces of yourself to those who do not value them. This is why people over 60 begin to avoid others, not because they are sad or lonely, but because they have finally learned the most important lesson of all. Not everyone deserves access to you. Think about how much energy a person gives away over the course of a lifetime. From childhood, we are taught to be polite, to be accommodating, to put others before ourselves. We are told that being liked is important, that being accepted is necessary, that saying yes is the key to belonging. And so we spend years, decades even, filling our lives with people, with obligations, with social commitments that stretch us thin. We tolerate toxic relationships because we are afraid to be alone. We entertain shallow conversations because silence feels uncomfortable. We keep people around, not because they add value to our lives, but because we are conditioned to believe that solitude is something to be feared. But then life happens. Experiences shape you, betrayals open your eyes, disappointments teach you, and eventually you reach a point where you can no longer ignore what has been right in front of you all along. Not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. Not everyone who calls you family has your best interests at heart. Not everyone who claims to love you truly knows how to. And when you see this truth clearly, something inside of you shifts. You stop chasing. You stop explaining. You stop justifying your choices to people who were never truly listening. You stop making space for those who only take and never give. And what does the world do when they see this shift? It misunderstands. It assumes something is wrong. It tells you that you have changed, that you have become distant, that you are shutting people out. But in reality, you are not shutting people out. You are simply refusing to let the wrong people in. You are not avoiding connection. You are choosing quality over quantity. You are not bitter, you are wise. This is the greatest gift of growing older. The ability to see clearly, the courage to choose differently, and the strength to walk away from anything that does not serve your peace. It is not loneliness. It is not isolation. It is liberation. But here's the truth. This wisdom is not reserved for those over 60. You don't have to wait decades to wake up. You don't have to spend years in toxic cycles before you finally learn to value your own energy. You can choose right now to step away from anything that drains you. You can choose today to stop explaining yourself to those who refuse to understand you. You can choose in this moment to stop giving your time to people who only take from you. Ask yourself, who in your life truly values you? Who reciprocates the energy you give? Who shows up for you the way you have always shown up for them? And who only appears when they need something? Who drains you? Who leaves you feeling empty, exhausted, unappreciated? And why are they still in your life? The moment you answer these questions honestly is the moment you reclaim your power. The moment you stop making excuses for people who have shown you time and time again who they really are is the moment you free yourself. The moment you stop settling for relationships that require you to shrink yourself is the moment you step into the life you were always meant to live. Because the truth is, the people who truly care about you will never make you question it. The right people will never require you to sacrifice your peace just to keep them in your life. The right people will align with you, respect you, value you, not just when it's convenient for them, but always. And the wrong people? They will fade away the moment they realize they can no longer use you. So when you see someone over 60 choosing solitude over social obligation, walking away from unnecessary drama, distancing themselves from people they once entertained, understand that they have reached a level of clarity that many never attain. They have learned that real happiness does not come from being surrounded by people. It comes from being at peace with yourself. It comes from being free of the burdens of false connections. It comes from living in alignment with your truth, your values, your inner wisdom. And if you are lucky, if you are awake enough to see the lesson, you don't have to wait until you are 60 to embrace this freedom. You can start now. You can stop explaining yourself to people who refuse to understand you. You can stop justifying your choices to those who were never truly listening. You can stop tolerating relationships that do not nourish your soul. The world will tell you that being alone is a problem, that choosing yourself is selfish, that prioritizing your well-being means you are pushing others away. But the truth is, real connection, real love, real friendship will never require you to betray yourself. The right people will meet you where you are. The right people will respect your boundaries. The right people will celebrate your growth. And anyone who does not is simply not meant to stay. So take a lesson from those who have lived long enough to see through the illusions. Protect your peace. Be selective with your energy, and never be afraid to walk alone if it means walking in truth. Because in the end, the people who truly matter, the people who are meant to be in your life, will always meet you where you are. And that Let's talk about something that people don't often think about until they experience it firsthand. As people get older, as they pass 60, something changes. They start pulling away, becoming more selective about who they spend time with, avoiding social interactions that once felt natural. And society, always eager to label things, calls it loneliness, calls it aging, calls it a phase. But the truth is deeper than that. The truth is shocking because it reveals something that most people never stop to consider. People over 60 don't avoid others because they've lost something. They avoid others because they've gained something: clarity, awareness, and the wisdom to protect their peace. For years, decades even, they played the game, they showed up, they smiled, they engaged in conversations they didn't care for, they kept relationships going because it was expected of them, they tolerated energy-draining people, gossip, unnecessary drama, and obligations that left them exhausted. And for what? To be seen as polite? To avoid being called difficult? To maintain connections that no longer serve them? But when you've lived long enough, when you've experienced enough, when you've given and received very little in return, something inside of you shifts. You start to ask yourself, what am I really gaining from all of this? And for the first time, you realize very little. This is why people over 60 begin to step back. It's not about sadness. It's not about resentment. It's about finally understanding what truly matters. It's about seeing the world for what it is, and more importantly, seeing people for who they truly are. It's about understanding that not every relationship is worth maintaining, not every conversation is worth having, and not every invitation is worth accepting. Because when you've spent years investing in relationships that were never truly reciprocal, when you've spent decades saying yes when you wanted to say no, when you've exhausted yourself trying to be everything for everyone, you eventually reach a point where you refuse to do it anymore. Not because you're bitter, but because you're wise. People love to talk about self-care, about valuing yourself, about putting yourself first. But when someone actually does it, when someone decides that their peace is more important than forced interactions, the world doesn't know how to handle it. They call it isolation. They call it withdrawal. But what they fail to realize is that solitude is not the same as loneliness. In fact, some of the loneliest people in the world are those who are constantly surrounded by others, trapped in shallow relationships, in empty conversations, in social obligations that drain them rather than fulfill them. By the time you reach 60, you understand something that younger people struggle with. Not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone deserves your time, your energy, your presence. Because time is precious and peace is priceless. And the more you give yourself away to people who don't appreciate you, the more you drain yourself of the energy that could be used for something meaningful. Think about it. How many times have you tolerated people who made you feel worse, not better? How many times have you entertained conversations that left you feeling exhausted instead of inspired? How many times have you kept people around simply because of history, because of obligation, because you felt like you had to? But when you reach a certain point in life, you stop playing those games. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't listen. You stop justifying your choices to people who will never understand them. You stop trying to make others comfortable at the expense of your own happiness. And the world doesn't like that, because the world is used to people who conform, who say yes, who follow the script without question. The world is uncomfortable with those who prioritize their own peace, their own energy, their own mental well-being. And that's why so many older people are misunderstood. They're not avoiding people because they're bitter. They're avoiding people because they've learned the cost of allowing the wrong ones into their space. But here's the thing. This wisdom isn't just for those over 60. You don't have to wait until you've spent decades in the wrong company, in the wrong conversations, in the wrong relationships before you wake up to this truth. You can choose right now to stop entertaining what does not serve you. You can choose right now to walk away from anything and anyone that drains you. You can choose right now to stop making excuses for people who do not value you. Ask yourself, who in my life genuinely adds value? Who shows up for me the way I show up for them? Who respects my time, my energy, my boundaries? And then ask yourself the harder question, who only calls when they need something? Who drains me, exhausts me, leaves me feeling empty? Who do I keep in my life out of guilt, out of habit, out of obligation, rather than true connection? The moment you answer these questions honestly is the moment you take your power back. The moment you stop making excuses for people who do not show up for you is the moment you free yourself. Because the truth is, the people who genuinely care about you will never make you question it. The right people will respect your boundaries, will honor your space, will value your presence, not just when it's convenient for them, but always. And the wrong people, the moment they realize they can no longer use you, they will fade away. So when you see someone over 60 choosing peace over drama, solitude over superficiality, selectivity over social obligation, understand that they have reached a level of clarity that many never attain. They have learned that true happiness doesn't come from being surrounded by people. It comes from being in alignment with yourself, from being at peace with your choices, from living on your own terms. And if you're wise, you won't wait until you're 60 to embrace that truth. You can start today. You can choose yourself today. You can stop explaining yourself, stop justifying your boundaries, stop making room for those who do not respect you. You can decide that your peace is more important than forced connections. You can understand that solitude is not something to fear, it is something to cherish. Because in solitude, you find clarity. In solitude, you meet yourself. In solitude, you learn what truly matters. And what truly matters is this: you deserve peace. You deserve relationships that nourish you. You deserve conversations that uplift you. You deserve to live a life that is full, not of obligation, but of genuine connection. And anything that does not align with that, it's not worth your time. So take a lesson from those who have lived long enough to see through the illusions. Protect your peace. Be selective with your energy. And never be afraid to walk alone if it means walking in truth. Because in the end, the people who truly matter, the people who are meant to be in your life, will always meet you where you are. And that is the greatest freedom of all. People over 60 start to distance themselves from others, and society rushes to call it loneliness, depression, or aging. But that's not the truth. The truth is something far more shocking, something most people don't realize until they live it. These individuals aren't withdrawing because they've lost interest in life or because they've become bitter. They are stepping back because they've gained something that few ever truly understand. They have lived long enough, experienced enough, and given enough to finally see things for what they really are. For years, they played along. They attended events, engaged in small talk, maintained relationships that were one-sided, and tolerated people who drained them rather than uplifted them. They showed up when they were expected to, said yes when they wanted to say no, and carried the weight of obligations that did nothing but exhaust them. They were that staying connected, no matter how forced, was better than standing alone. But then something changed. After decades of repeating the same cycles, of watching patterns unfold, of witnessing the true nature of people, they reached a realization that is both powerful and liberating. Most of it doesn't matter. Most of the people they spent time with weren't truly invested in them. Most of the conversations they had were empty and superficial. Most of the energy they gave away went to people who never reciprocated. And when this realization hit, there was no going back. This is why people over 60 begin to distance themselves. Not because they are lonely, but because they are finally prioritizing themselves. They are choosing quality over quantity. They are saying no to drama, to empty connections, to people who drain their energy. They are no longer interested in maintaining relationships that require them to shrink themselves or compromise their peace. And what does the world do when it sees this? It misunderstands. It assumes something is wrong. It calls it isolation, reclusiveness, or even arrogance. But that couldn't be further from the truth. These people are not avoiding connection. They are simply being selective about where they invest their time and energy. They have learned, often the hard way, that not everyone deserves access to them, that not every invitation is worth accepting, that being alone is far better than being surrounded by people who don't truly care. Think about how much energy a person gives away over a lifetime. From childhood, we are conditioned to be accommodating, to be agreeable, to put others before ourselves. We are told that maintaining relationships is a responsibility, even if they drain us. We are led to believe that being liked is more important than being at peace. And so we spend decades making sure others are comfortable while neglecting our own well-being. But when you reach a certain point in life, you can no longer ignore what has been obvious all along. Not everyone you meet is a friend. Not everyone who smiles at you has good intentions. Not everyone who says they care actually does. And when you finally see through the illusions, you stop playing the game. You stop giving your time to people who only take. You stop entertaining conversations that add nothing to your life. You stop keeping people around just because of history, guilt, or obligation. And the world doesn't know how to handle that. It's used to people who comply, who conform, who keep giving endlessly without questioning whether they should. So when someone steps back, when they choose themselves, when they prioritize peace over social expectations, it may. But here's the truth. This wisdom is not reserved for those over 60. You don't have to wait decades to learn this lesson. You don't have to exhaust yourself in meaningless relationships before realizing that your time is precious. You can choose right now to stop explaining yourself to people who don't truly listen, to stop justifying your boundaries to those who have never respected them, to stop giving your energy to those who take it for granted. Ask yourself, who truly values you? Who shows up for you the way you show up for them? Who respects your time, your energy, your presence? And now ask the harder question, who drains you? Who leaves you feeling exhausted, unappreciated, unseen? Who do you keep around simply because you feel obligated to? The moment you answer these questions honestly is the moment you reclaim your power. The moment you stop making excuses for people who have shown you time and time again who they really are is the moment you set yourself free. Because the truth is, the people who genuinely care about you will never make you question it. The right people will never require you to sacrifice your peace to keep them in your life. The right people will align with you naturally, effortlessly, without force or obligation. And the wrong people, the moment they realize they can no longer use you, they will disappear. And that's the greatest gift of all, because their absence is your peace. So when you see someone over 60 choosing solitude over social expectation, walking away from conversations that drain them, distancing themselves from relationships that no longer serve them, understand that they have not lost their way, they have found it. They have reached a level of clarity that many never attain. They have discovered that real happiness doesn't come from being surrounded by people. It comes from being at peace with yourself, from being free of unnecessary burdens, from living life on your own terms. And if you are wise, you won't wait until you're 60 to embrace that truth. You won't waste years explaining yourself to people who refuse to understand you. You won't tolerate relationships that make you feel small. You won't say yes when your heart is screaming no. The world will tell you that being alone is a problem, that prioritizing yourself is selfish, that walking away from relationships is cruel. But the truth is, real connection, real love, real friendship will never require you to betray yourself. The right people will meet you where you are. The right people will respect your space, your boundaries, your growth. And the ones who don't, they were never meant to stay. So take a lesson from those who have lived long enough to see through the illusions. Protect your peace. Be selective with your energy and never be afraid to walk alone if it means walking in truth. Because in the end, the people who truly matter, the people who are meant to be in your life, will always meet you where you are. And there comes a time in life when people start pulling away. They stop showing up as much. They become more selective with their time, their energy, their presence. And society looks at them and says they're lonely, depressed, maybe even bitter. But that assumption couldn't be further from the truth. What's really happening is something that most people never realize until they experience it themselves. These people aren't withdrawing because they've lost something. They're withdrawing because they've gained something. Clarity. For decades, they were part of the noise. They were in the mix, saying yes when they wanted to say no, engaging in conversations they didn't care for, maintaining relationships that took more than they gave. They played the role they were expected to play, smiled when they didn't feel like it, gave when they had nothing left, and tolerated situations that drained them. And for what? To be liked, to avoid being labeled difficult, to maintain a sense of belonging that never truly fulfilled them. But when you've lived long enough, when you've seen the patterns repeat over and over again, you start asking yourself the hard questions. What am I really gaining from this? Who in my life truly values me? Who reciprocates what I give? And when the answers aren't what you hoped they'd be, everything changes. This is why people over 60 begin to distance themselves, not because they are sad, not because they are lost, but because they've finally found something worth protecting, their peace. They've spent years, decades even, giving and giving, only to realize that very few people ever truly give back. They've spent lifetimes accommodating others, only to realize that when they need support, most of those people are nowhere to be found. They've spent too much time entertaining relationships that have long since expired, conversations that go nowhere, and obligations that serve no purpose. And so one day they wake up and decide, no more. They stop explaining themselves. They stop justifying their boundaries. They stop apologizing for wanting to be at peace. And that's when the world, which is so used to people overextending themselves, doesn't know how to respond. It assumes something must be wrong. It calls it isolation. It calls it withdrawal. But what the world doesn't understand is that solitude and loneliness are not the same thing. In fact, some of the loneliest people are those constantly surrounded by others, trapped in empty conversations, in forced interactions, in relationships that have no real depth. When you've lived long enough, you see people for who they truly are. You recognize the users, the manipulators, the people who only come around when they need something. You see through the fake smiles, the empty words, the ones who pretend to care but never truly show up. And instead of continuing to entertain these people, you make the choice to walk away. Not with anger, not with resentment, but with clarity. This is what people don't understand about those who start stepping back. It's not about bitterness, it's about wisdom. It's about realizing that time is limited, energy is sacred, and not everyone deserves access to you. Because when you spend years giving yourself away to people who don't appreciate it, you drain yourself of the energy that could be used for something meaningful. How many times have you said yes when you wanted to say no? How many times have you kept a conversation going when you didn't care for it? How many times have you let people stay in your life simply because you felt obligated to? But when you reach a certain stage in life, you stop doing those things. You stop entertaining what does not serve you. You stop giving explanations to those who never truly listened. You stop feeling guilty for choosing yourself. And here's the thing. This wisdom isn't just for those over 60. You don't have to wait until you've exhausted yourself to realize that your peace is more important than keeping up appearances. You can choose now to stop justifying your boundaries. You can choose now to stop making excuses for people who do not value you. You can choose now to walk away from relationships that no longer serve you. Ask yourself, who in your life truly adds value? Who respects your time, your presence, your energy? And then ask yourself the harder question, who drains you? Who takes but never gives? Who keeps you around only for what you can offer them? The moment you answer these questions honestly is the moment everything shifts. Because once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. Once you recognize who genuinely cares and who is only there for convenience, you start moving differently. You start saying no without guilt. You start prioritizing your own well-being. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never listening in the first place. And the people who benefited from your lack of boundaries, the ones who thrived on your inability to say no, they won't like it. They'll call you distant. They'll say you've changed. They'll act as if you're the problem. But the truth is, the only thing that's changed is that you've finally seen them for who they are. So when you see someone over 60 choosing themselves, protecting their space, walking away from unnecessary drama, understand that they have reached a level of clarity that most never attain. They have learned that happiness doesn't come from being surrounded by people. It comes from being in alignment with yourself. It comes from peace, from freedom, from the ability to live life on your own terms. And if you're wise, you won't wait until you're 60 to embrace that truth. You won't waste years explaining yourself to people who refuse to understand you. You won't tolerate relationships that make you feel small. You won't say yes out of guilt. The world will tell you that being alone is a problem, that prioritizing yourself is selfish, that walking away from relationships is cruel. But the truth is, real connection, real love, real friendship will never require you to betray yourself. The right people will meet you where you are. The right people will respect your space, your boundaries, your growth. And the ones who don't, they were never meant to stay. So take a lesson from those who have lived long enough to see through the illusions. Protect your peace. Be selective with your energy, and never be afraid to walk alone if it means walking in truth. Because in the end, the people who truly matter, the people who are meant to be in your life, will always meet you where you are. And that is the greatest freedom of all.